All right, Mike Morelli here with Josh Koerpel from Mike Morelli here from Peak Prosper. I'm with Josh Koerpel here. He's from Firebuilders. He's a software developer. He's a writer. He's a world traveler, photographer. Josh, I couldn't be more stoked to have you on here today, man. Your story is something that, I've admired from afar. The first time we connected was on a mastermind, and it's been like over a year since that. So dude, welcome, and stoked to do this interview with you, man.
Thank you, man. I really appreciate it. And I'm stoked to be here as well. Hard to believe how fast that year has gone until this point.
Yeah, totally. And so, just for anyone, watching this and, wondering a little bit about why we got Josh on here today. And, Josh is someone that, I'm going to obviously let you tell your own story, man. But I mean, when we first connected, I checked out your Facebook profile and I was like, this guy's going on adventures. Like, he's sailing around the world. He rode a motorcycle through India. It looked like you had done some traveling through Southeast Asia. And a lot of the guys that are attracted to our message here at Peak Prosper, they want to live that adventurous lifestyle, right? They value experiences over material things. And your journey is something that's unique, right? And you've got so much wisdom to really share with people. And so really just wanted to get you on here today and kind of uncover your story.
Yeah, man. Well, of course, happy to share. And I've learned a thing or two, like on all of these trips and stuff. Certainly the trip through India was a massive one. And then, like, I guess just to kind of give people context, I mean, I went to college in the middle of nowhere, Ohio, and got a Spanish degree, didn't know what I wanted to do, ended up volunteering on a ship out of Erie, Pennsylvania, and that like kicked off my entire tall ship career. And I spent years on different ships all over the world sailing. And you do that for a while, and you get enough sea time to get your captain's license, and then from there you can actually drive these things legally and take paying passengers and stuff on board. And then from there, you kind of hit a plateau. And then I launched myself into going back to school. I went to BU, got a master's in mechanical engineering, worked for a company called McLaren, and we were like the Navy SEALs essentially of the engineering world when it came to entertainment related stuff. So everything that like Cirque du Soleil uses, everything that Disney and Universal Studios, we did a ton of stuff for Vegas, just about every major rock show in existence. Like they used us to essentially take their crazy, awesome, like powerful, but unknown ideas on how they were going to achieve it, and then we like sat down and figured out the physics to make that stuff happen. So it was a lot of problem solving, very cerebral. I spent my days in spreadsheets. Then you get to a point where you're just like, dude, there's I can't do this forever. I mean, you look around the office and there are just people wandering around like zombies. They've been there forever. And you say to yourself, do I really want to become that type of person? No, the answer was no. And so I taught myself how to develop mobile apps, and started to go down that path, developed a whole bunch of them, realized I didn't know jack about marketing. That launched me into figuring out all the marketing and sales related stuff. And then I used all of these pieces of my past to start to solve problems that I saw in the marketing world, which led me to create software and led me to have a little bit more, freedom to work and to work from just about anywhere. So that's kind of it in a nutshell.
All right, let's wrap it up. No, like,
Yeah.
so with this, because there's two things I want to touch on here first. The first thing is that you went to college in the middle of nowhere, Ohio. And through that experience, you wound up, going on these different ships and kind of going on these, sounds like micro adventures and learning a lot. I'm curious, what made you want to go back into school? I mean, it sounds like you had this experience right out of the gate. You're on these ships. You're like, whoa, this is blowing my mind. But then you go back into a master's degree. What was happening at that point?
Unrealized potential.
Okay.
That was the big thing for me, is that I I knew engineering and the math and physics side of things was something that I was always pretty like naturally good at. I did that ever since I was a kid. Um, it was a funny. I was just telling somebody this the other day. Like when I was a kid, I used to go to these big department stores, which are like now few and far between, but things like Ames and J.C. Penney and stuff like that. I would go there with my mom and she would be shopping. And I'm like, you know, this 6, 7 year old kid, I'm wandering around the floor of the place. And I would find all of these bits and pieces of like hangers and rubber bands and all kinds of like weird stuff. And I used to create like things with them. I would make like machines and things. And I totally forgot about that whole thing until I went back recently and saw some stuff in the like in my mom's thing, and it all made sense. So I kind of had that natural interest in math and physics, but I never pursued it. So after I did the tall ship stuff, and I kind of got you come to the realization that you're either gonna the only way up is to like go start to drive like cruise ships and really big stuff, or go the private route. And it wasn't for me. I like weighed those pros and cons really heavily, and I just said, look, like I can do this. I searched around. I found a very special program at Boston University,
Mhm.
um, and just devoted 100% of my attention to it. Moved to Boston, of course, and just spent the next like 3.5 years busting my ass to get a master's. And it was a welcome change. You know, the tall ship stuff, very physical,
Mhm.
not so much mental. Like you know, you have to be smart, of course, you have to be intelligent, you have to be able to make split-second decisions on the water and for the benefit of passengers that are on board and keeping them safe. But it wasn't like you weren't like figuring out things that have never been done before.
Yep.
And that's kind of what I wanted. Uh so yeah, so then I figured, well, the way to do it is to prove myself, go back to school, get a master's, go through the motions and see what happens. And so that's why I made the decision to do it.
And then you wind up going into this job. You know, it's you're essentially a Navy SEAL in the in the
Yeah,
tech world,
well,
right?
because everybody else, I mean, I have a lot of friends that went through the same program, and they all came from different, really eclectic backgrounds and stuff. The majority of them went and got the jobs that like were at the job fair. So GE rotating parts division, or material science related stuff, or biomimicry things with the automotive industry, you know, things like that. And I'm like, screw that, man. I want to use both my creative brain and my analytical brain and do that both to the best of my ability. So I searched hardcore to find an entertainment related job. I didn't even know that it existed until well into my search. And as soon as I found it, I was like, this is it. Now, what do I have to do to go and get this job? Because there's only like two companies in the entire country that do
Mhm.
that. And it's extremely competitive to get in. And I knew that from the start. Uh, so dude, I went to great lengths just to get an internship at this place. You know, I'm
Yep.
talking like I tracked down the president of the company and met him, like essentially stalked him, but then met him at a place where he was speaking and made sure that I was like the first person that he talked to right at the end of his speech, and then got a number and like an in, and then a relentless like 6 month pursuit just to get the internship.
Yeah.
Uh, but it's a metaphor for like you kind of gotta figure out what you want and go after it with a fervor, you know.
Yeah, that you just read my mind because that's exactly kind of what I wanted to like just have a quick note on here. And it's like I think so often in life when we want something really bad, and it doesn't matter what it is, right? It could be a thriving romantic relationship, it could be, you know, lifestyle freedom, it could be financial stability, whatever it is, meaningful work, scaling your business. We like hope and pray, or we say, you know, I want that, but we don't actually go after it with intense desire, right? And we'll just fall into the trap of doing what everyone else is doing. Like if you fell into the trap, Josh, of, I'm just going to send out a resume and, maybe send a couple follow-up emails, we probably wouldn't even be having this conversation, right?
Yeah, 100%. Um, I was actually, I adopted this mantra like way back in the day when I started, because I did make a resume and I had to write cover letters and all of that stuff. But I adopted this mantra that was, that was, I was going to, I was going to keep sending them emails, however many it needed to be, like one a week, twice a week, whatever. I was going to keep doing it until one of two things happened. Either they just told me to stop, right? Or I got the job. And, uh, and I found out like a lot of people don't do that. They say no for the company. So, you send an email out and you're like, hey, I'm really interested in working here. You never hear anything back. And then then you come to the worst case conclusion. Oh, they must not like me. They must not want to hire me.
Yeah.
I'm going to move on to the next thing. When in reality, most of the time, that's not true at all. It's just that they're busy as hell. So, by the way, can I swear on this thing?
Of course.
I Yeah, okay. I just want to make sure I don't.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, yeah. Um, so that's the thing, is that you just have to be persistent, because just like you said, I mean, people want a lot of things. They want a lifestyle where they can travel around and work. Most people want the idea of that. They only find out through the process that the realities and the things that you kind of have to give up in order to achieve that, they're not willing to make those sacrifices. So it's better to like find that out early.
Yeah.
Um, that's the key. And the way to do that is just to pursue stuff. Just go and do it.
Yeah.
Um,
I
yeah,
love it. I know I love it, man. It's like any transformation that you want to take in your life takes legitimate work, and it's going to require you to do new actions, so people, they set some goal or whatever it is, they have some desire, and then the first sign of obstacle, they hit that a roadblock, right? They send out the email, they didn't hear back, and then they just go into their own self-defeating limiting belief where that says, oh, they must not, they must not want me, they must think I'm annoying. And that's just insecurity, right? I mean, those are just limiting beliefs. You have to be able to see through your own bullshit sometimes and just keep going and really find out the truth.
yeah, 100%. It really comes to, and I personally think it comes down to what you end up telling yourself, like how you can reframe things in a way that that works for you, because everybody's different. I can tell you like what happened with me was really early on with all of the dude, I was like 29 years old going back to school, sitting in some undergraduate classes with like 19-year-old kids. And it's intimidating because I hadn't been back in the classroom for like 10 years. The first test, particularly like physics, a lot of like calculus stuff, those first tests, you're just scared shitless. You're like, what am I doing? But then I came up with this thought. I said, like, I need to reframe this, man, because this isn't working. I can't live in fear of these tests every single time. So instead, I started telling myself, like, Josh, you know that you can do this. You 100% know that you're capable of crushing this. They, they as in Boston University, they only give you 3 or 4 opportunities to prove you know what the fuck you're doing, right? Throughout the school year. So take advantage of those, right? Look forward to those opportunities, because those are the times where you will do well, and it will be undisputed that you know what you're talking about. Like that's how you'll differentiate yourself. And as soon as I started saying that, all the fear of the tests went away, and I started almost looking forward to the challenge, looking forward to the journey. And then and then of course you do well, because you're not letting all that stress stop you from
Yeah.
performing at your best. You're like looking forward to it, because you know what you're worth, and you know that there's going to be only a few chances to prove it without a shadow of a doubt.
Yeah.
That's all I did.
Yeah. No, I love it. And you essentially just changed your focus, right? And like we like manifest our own fear. We feel fear and we like focus on it. Why is this happening? It must be true. And we like essentially look in our external environment for proof of that. We get the, get a bad grade. Oh my God, I can see everything's going wrong. And we just manifest these things. But the same thing is that you can go in the other direction like you did. And Josh, one thing I would love to segue into here is, so you touched on this earlier. So you graduated, you get this job, and then you look around. This is, I'm really excited to kind of go into this transition of now more into like your entrepreneurial adventurous lifestyle, but you're working this job, you're looking around the office and you're saying, hold on a second, is that when that unrealized potential thing kind of came in and you're saying like, hold on a second, like,
Kind of, yeah. It was because we were doing some really cool stuff. Don't get me wrong.
mhm,
Really cool projects, interesting stuff that no one will ever give us credit for because we were the behind the scenes people who made it happen. But at the end of the day, like nobody celebrates, nobody celebrates them. Like it's the production company, or they just look at Justin Timberlake and they're like, oh man, that's super cool. Like they get all the credit. And again, I was so grateful to have the job. I loved it. I loved the work. But then you start to realize day after day and ask yourself, how long can I take this? Because I'm working really hard, and we're talking like 10, 11-hour days where the mental load, to put it in perspective, the mental load is like basically taking the math SATs every single day. I mean, that's essentially what it was. And uh, and to top it all off, the stress, because there's no back of the book answer that tells you whether or not something's right or something's not right. You have to justify it on your own. So it's incredibly cerebral, very logical. And you say to yourself, man, I'm working in a position where I'm really not, I don't feel like I'm contributing 100% to this. There's some decisions being made that I just don't necessarily agree with. How long can I take this? I mean, am I all right to accept this reality and get paid like clockwork every single month, not have to worry about that? But a part of me inside dies because I know that I'm not fulfilled the way that I hope that I could be. And at the end of the day, I'll probably end up like these guys in the office, these older guys in the office. So I was doing this. I rode the motorcycle across the hills of Pennsylvania, and in the middle of that trip, I came to this realization and said, there's no other way around it. I have to take control of my own future. How am I going to do that? And at the time, I was like curious about what the software development was and the app related stuff was. And I had done a bunch of programming at BU, and I had taught this programming language called MATLAB for a number of years. So I understood the concepts, but I'm like, maybe that's the ticket. Maybe that's the freedom that I'm looking for. And so that was the catalyst for the entrepreneurial journey, breaking away and doing that. And don't get me wrong, it's not like I just quit the engineering job and went headstrong
yeah,
into app development. No, no, no. I worked I worked for McLaren for 3 years, but then pretty much 2.5 of those years, it was like working two completely separate 9 to 5 jobs. I would wake up at 5 a.m. I would do like hours of app work. I would go to work. I would come back at like 6, and then I would do another couple of hours of app related stuff. So this was over the course of like 2 years,
oh my
two and a
God.
half years.
How did
Um,
you manage the work, like stress and workload at that time and so much technology time, right? Like, how are you managing that?
I was excited to do the app stuff.
Okay.
Like it really, I was inspired to do it. I found that there were aspects of creating software that I didn't realize I would love so much. The graphic design, the UI and the UX, like the user experience, being able to solve an actual problem. And then once you do your first app, so once you create your first thing, when you tell people that you're creating an app, everybody's going to be like, oh, cool, man. But they're just not going to get it.
Yeah.
And then you actually have something on your phone that you have created and you give it to other people and they start to use it and they get it. It's like a huge milestone. And and inside you're just like, holy crap, like this is a possibility. People are using my stuff and they're actually liking it. So then that pours a little bit of fuel on the fire, and that helps you through all of the really, really long nights, long days. Another massive milestone is when somebody buys it for the first time. So the first time somebody actually bought the app, I was like over the moon excited, and you just say to yourself, man, like this could work. Like this really, this is the thing. Um, so you just hit these little markers along the way that speed you up. It's like in Mario Kart where you go over that one spot where it like speeds you up.
Yeah.
Uh, there's a bunch of those along the way, and you just have to get far enough to find them. You know?
It's interesting how you talk about the the different work that you were doing at the same time, the different parts of the brain that each of them were using. So, for people who are listening right now, there's two parts of the brain, the logical, analytical part of the brain, and then the intuitive side, right? And the intuitive side is when we're tapping into kind of that sense of, soul purpose, what's happening on the inside, that inner desire, that thing that inside of you that you can't really describe, but it feels innate, right? And the logical, analytical part is like, it's like the thinking part of the brain. It's the mind part of the brain. And so it's like that A to B type of thinking, black and white, where intuitive is more like A to infinity, right? And so you talk about when you were working at the 9 to 5 job, or maybe it was a little bit longer than 9 to 5, but you were saying, oh, it's so very logical. But then all of a sudden you started going into the intuitive part of the brain with the app developing. And that came from riding your motorcycle through the hills of Pennsylvania, where you had this like gut inspiration. That's like your intuition saying, hey, man, you're not really tapping into your higher sense of self here. And then you started doing that work. You followed your nose, right? You followed your intuition. And here we are now.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. Like, and to be honest, so this was back in 2013, roughly. Is that true? 2012, 2013? Yeah, around then. And um, I can tell you that I wasn't on Facebook. I wasn't looking up all of these entrepreneurial groups and part of it and trying to contribute to the conversation. And to be honest, I'm really glad that I wasn't in retrospect, because when you're first starting out with stuff like that, especially if it's like a major switch and you have all this, like the iron's hot, like you have all of this drive at the very beginning, the internet is so full of information, both good and bad, that the more that you read and the more that you try and like intellectually pursue it instead of just going out and doing it on your own, the more disheartened you can become. And it makes me wonder whether or not, had I read all of this stuff about apps and how hard it was and how saturated it is, how the marketing and sales and stuff, I wonder, had I pursued it,
Yeah.
if I would have done it. Um, so yeah, whenever you're starting something new and you feel that intuitive pull and you follow your nose, so to speak,
Yeah.
you just have to go and do it. And you have to expect that you're going to run into some roadblocks, but don't try and outthink them, right? Don't like, consumption of information sometimes isn't the best thing. You just got to go out and experience it, and the work will teach you the work.
Yeah. Oh, wow. We could do the rest of the podcast on exactly what you just said. But the truth is that you have to stop thinking so much, right? When we think, it's like Josh, when people are dealing with these like obsessive thoughts that they're trying to get out of, these negative thoughts they've experienced for a long time in their past, you cannot outthink your thinking mind. And you can only think as great as you've only been thinking, right? You have to go and tap into your intuition and go do something different and be willing to embrace that discomfort. I think a lot of the times people get trapped in, like, the stuck in my head. We get stuck in our head because we keep trying to outthink our problems. And our logical, analytical mind, as a byproduct of evolutionary progress, will always give you another answer. It will always outthink you. And you can't I would say that you can't achieve your dreams and goals by sitting there and thinking all the time, right? It's like you have to go listen to this thing. But the problem about this, and this is what my mentor, Garrett Gunderson, said to me on the phone a couple of weeks ago. He goes, you have to follow your intuition. He goes, but the crux of that is that it takes courage, right? I mean, it takes courage to go through your intuition, because there's going to be roadblocks. Like you said, there's always going to be roadblocks, because welcome to life.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, and like the knowledge. I mean, there's something to be said about sitting and contemplating
Mhm.
the best course of action. I realize that there certainly is a time and a place for that.
Absolutely.
Um, but if you're just living in your head, the idea of A versus the idea of B, both of them have positives and negatives,
Yep.
and it's impossible for you to really weigh them against one another because they're not tangible yet.
Yeah.
And so I agree. Like listen to your intuition, contemplate something, but then act upon it. Like it's that action that creates the clarity that you're looking for, and will ultimately kind of determine whether or not you should just keep doing it or maybe pivot and go some other direction.
Yeah. And the kind of a last word here is because I know that some of the guys that are even in our transformation program are going to sit here right now and say, Mike, what are you talking about? You tell me to get quiet and think, but there's the difference of what Josh and I are talking about. Is there's a huge difference between sitting quietly and and just thinking, right? Very powerful practice. You should do it every day. What we're talking about right now is that when you're trying to make a different life direction, when you're trying to go for a dreaming goal, right? And it makes you kind of feel stressed out, right? And you kind of feel anxious. That's when you don't start going down the rabbit hole of thinking. That's like the absolute worst time to do it, because you're essentially going into fight or flight, right? And you're producing that stress. You can't think clearly. And what your brain is going to give you the answers to make you stay safe and comfortable, right? So I think just wanted to quickly highlight the differences between like really what we're talking about right now. Is that,
Yeah.
is that spot on, Josh?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it makes sense. It's a, and it's a question of too, like it's a compound effect in my mind, where say I don't know, say that there's somebody listening that wants to leave their 9 to 5 and go pursue something a little bit more flexible, like some type of freelance or remote work or
Yeah.
or something like that. They can go and travel around. Okay, um, so it's like I personally subscribe to the idea, and I do this to myself all the time, that that I'd like to envision, when I envision what the end goal is, and say the end goal is to become a freelance writer and travel around to all these different high-end places and write about it. Let's just say, for example, that that's the goal. Well, in your mind, you have this idea of what that looks like. And once you form that, I think that we all have a tendency to say, not be satisfied until that happens. And most of the time, that vision that you have is full of moving parts, each of which that will take quite a bit of time to fall into place. And so what I do is I I simplify everything, and I say to myself, like, okay, I want to do the travel writing thing. Excellent. Like what's how could I do this? Today's Thursday. So how could I do this um, by Monday? How could I like have something done and figure something out by Monday? Um, because that forces you to compromise your vision and say, well, maybe it doesn't have to be this grandiose thing. Maybe I can just reach out to a couple magazines right now, or maybe I can go and find somebody interesting around my town that I think other people might find interesting, and go and see if I could sit down with an interview with them. There's like all these different ways to do it. It's just that we have our great vision, and then we say to ourselves, well, I'm not going to be satisfied unless this is achieved. And most of the time it's just ludicrous to continue to think that way. You kind of have to adapt to the realities of the situation.
Yeah. 100%. 100%. At this point, I would love to just start to really talk about some of your adventures. Just the background, to be honest with you, Josh, I didn't really know your background of getting to the point of the life that you're living now. And it's the reason why I want to harp on that is because so often in whatever it is in this world today, we love to highlight people's successes, but we rarely understand the journey that it took to get there. And that's real life, right? That's real life. There is the journey from where you got to now. And it's like, yeah, you went back to college, you were working in a job, you spent 2.5 years essentially working like 14 hours a day to make it happen. Right. And I love that context because, personal development and like be your best self is all about hacks, quick fixes. And we know that quick fixes don't work, right? It requires hard work, sacrifice, and long term compound interest. So, one of the stories I'd love to kind of highlight is the motorcycle ride through India. Could you talk to us about that? Because I remember when we spoke on the phone like a year ago, you were telling me that story, and I was just like, I thought it was the coolest thing ever because I'd also been to India.
Yeah, yeah, man. I'd be happy to. One of my favorite times of my entire life. And essentially, I flew into New Delhi, found a guest house in a backpacking part of New Delhi called Paharganj, and started asking around as to where I could buy a motorcycle. Found a guy named Bullet Walla,
What
sold
was his
these
name?
Bullet Walla, uh, and he sold me a 1986 single cylinder 350 cc Royal Enfield Bullet, um, and I then rode that thing first south. Uh, that was like the test trip. And by the way, like, yes, I had some motorcycle experience. Nothing prepares you for India, especially riding a motorcycle around, because one, there are just inherent challenges with the bike and the way that they drive, as far as everybody drives on the left instead of the right. So you have to figure that out. Then the motorcycle itself is a British bike, and because of that, the controls were swapped. So
Oh, wow.
clutch and brake ended up being on different sides, which took a while to get. But just the first time that I knew that I had to pull out into New Delhi traffic, that was probably one of the most scared I've ever been in my life, because it is just throwing yourself into absolute sheer chaos.
Yeah.
Uh, After a
Could you
while,
describe that though for our audience? Because Josh, when I was in Bangalore and I had the bicycle and it was the first day and I literally remember it. I have a video on my iPhone. I had literally almost had a full breakdown panic attack. Like
yeah,
I've never seen traffic like that in my life. Can you just give some context to the audience? Like what's that?
yeah.
What is that like?
Okay, so you have to be, honestly, like, hyper aware of everything, and there is no, for some like, for some comparison, everybody here in the States, you just assume that other people are going to follow the rules, and you can't do that in India. Um, it is a free for all. It's almost like, the lines on the road don't exist. If you want to cross the road, you have to just straight up pull out in front of people. That's the only way to get them to stop. Uh, on the motorcycle itself, one of the most treacherous things is, you're going up these like mountain roads, right? And it's just wide enough for two cars, just barely. And a lot of really slow moving traffic, like donkeys and camels and stuff with big cartloads of things. Well, these tourist buses need to get around them, and they will just run you right off of the road. It is 100% might has right, and so you have absolutely no sway whatsoever on a motorcycle. And there were plenty of times where a bus just coming head on to us wasn't gonna move out of the way. It was like a game of chicken, and the only thing that you could do is just ride off of the road and into the dirt shoulder and stuff, let the bus fly by you, and then get back on your way. That was like a common occurrence. You hear whenever, if anybody looks up YouTube videos on New Delhi traffic, I encourage you to do it. You're going to hear it's nothing but horns. And it's not like everybody's just pissed off at one another. Horns, you use that constantly because it is a declaration of presence. It's not like, hey, fucking cut me off. Like, no way. You have to use your horn to let people know that you are there. I asked a rickshaw driver once, and he was telling me, he's like, when people drive in India, they only pay attention to what is directly ahead of them and to 45 degrees on either side. That's their like cone of responsibility. They cannot hit anything in that cone. Everything to the sides and the back of you, like, you don't care about. And if everybody does that, it just, it works. It like chaotically all just flows together. So, and then I'll just wrap it up with this. One of the best, and actually I used this piece of advice when I got down there. They said, look, if you're on the motorcycle, you get into an accident, right? You don't stop and wait for the cops and change insurance, exchange insurance information and stuff. You fucking get out of there. You just leave the scene. There's no point in staying. If you stay, it will be worse for you, no matter whose fault it is. You are the person visiting the country. You shouldn't be there to begin with. It will always be your fault. If it's a bad enough accident where somebody's like really hurt, you give them money and then you get the fuck out of there. So, so that actually happened. I ended up, a rickshaw hit me, and we didn't even stop. We just kept on going. There was
Wow.
no point whatsoever. Anyway, so that was just learning how to ride in New Delhi, and rode down to the Taj Mahal first. That was like the test ride. Rode back. Oil pump failed on the bike. The bike seized, so I couldn't go over like 20 miles an hour. I ended up riding for a full like 12 hours straight just to get back into the city. Then changed all that stuff out. Rode all the way to Tibet, so about 3,000 kilometers or so. All the way up into the Himalayas through the back door of Tibet. That's what they called it, this little mountain road in the Spiti and Parvati valleys, all the way to the border and then back. But the back part, there was like a freak snowstorm that happened in this little Buddhist monastery town, and we got snowed in. There were avalanches that killed the road on either side. It just happened to be in this little town called Kaza. And it didn't stop snowing for a couple of days. The snow banks were 20 feet high on either side of the road once they finally cleared it. And we
So
were
you're up
stuck
high
there.
in the mountains at this point. I mean, you're deep.
Yeah. I think Kaza's like maybe 13,000 feet,
Okay.
something like that.
Okay. Which is the top of like a Colorado mountain, essentially.
Yeah, it was in like in the middle of nowhere. If people are listening to this and they're interested in and looking to see where that is, Kaza, just type in Kaza, India, and see where that is in the Himalayas. So that's where, and we got stuck there for like just under 2 weeks. There was no telling whether or not we'd be able to get in or out. And they finally cleared the road. We were able to ride out. That was one of the most challenging rides of my life because all of the snow meltwater turned the road into essentially a giant like mud slide. And so it's some of the most challenging riding I've ever done, but got out of it. You just figure it out along the way. I mean, it's very much like anything. You go into it and you see the realities of the situation, you adapt, you keep moving, you survive, you move on, and then you come back and you have all of these like crazy stories to tell people that you survived.
Josh, why did you want to do that trip? Because the reason why I asked that question is because when I went to India, there was something in my life at that point that was like really saying, I had a real reason for wanting to do that. What was it for you? I mean, did you see something? Did you feel something? What was it that drew you to do that?
It was right after I stopped with the tall ship captain stuff.
Okay.
And I knew that man, I've been in Key West. I've been driving this boat for the better part of a year. Just wanted to change. and I had read about the Royal Enfield Himalaya motorcycle stuff years and years and years ago in a magazine, and it just always stuck with me. And I said to myself, screw it. Like, I have some money saved up. I'm just going to go and do it. Like, now's the time. I'm 27, 28, something like that. I'm just going to go and do this. So yeah, that was it. And I did a little bit of research beforehand, but again, it was one of those things where I'm glad I didn't know what I know now, because I probably would have second guessed everything and been like, should I really do this? Like, holy shit, like this seems hard. And it was, but you have no choice but to persevere through that. And then you find out, you come out the other side of it whole, way more confident about your abilities, and ready for the next challenge.
What was the biggest thing that you learned from that trip? You came back home, and I mean, your sense of, obviously, your confidence was probably through the roof, right? I mean, you just did this amazing trip that not many people will ever do. What was like one of the biggest takeaways that you learned from that trip?
I would say that that as a human, your problem solving skills in the face of like true danger. I mean, that snowstorm that hit everybody unexpectedly, unofficially, like 70 people ended up dying in that all over northern India, because it was just nuts. And uh and I guess the biggest takeaway is that you're way more capable than you give yourself credit for. You only find that out when you're put into situations that push you past your perceived limit.
Yeah.
um, and that's it. So you really do gain a better understanding of who you are, what you're capable of, how you handle stress, um, what you focus on. Like the tall ships taught me that too, but in India, for sure. I mean, when you're in the middle of nowhere and you have to, like, and your rear bearings have completely broken apart, and you have to rip the rear wheel off and change the tire and completely change out the bearings, where you haven't seen a soul in 6 days, and there's no help whatsoever. Like, you start to say to yourself, once you get it all fixed and you're back on the road, there's no better feeling. You're like, damn, man, I am self-sufficient. um, then
You are
you come
truly living in that moment.
Yeah,
You're the most a lot. You're the most a human being could truly be in that moment, in my opinion.
100%,
You're in a foreign
100%.
country. You're putting a back together a motorcycle on the road of India, and you fix it. You get back on the road, and you go, dude, I just did that. I
Yeah,
did that.
yeah. And
And
then
I'm
you
in
come
this moment right here.
and then you come back to the States, and you say to yourself, "Oh, I want to start a business." And that's not, by comparison, it's not life or death. Like, you're going to be fine. Like, just go do it, you
Yeah.
know? Or like, that's so that's the thing that has always worked for me. I put myself in really extreme situations, and I do that, one, because I just kind of like it and it makes me feel alive, but two, I've recognized the power of that point of comparison. Now when I go and do something new, if I'm going to switch out my branding, or go and change my career path or something like that, um, I know I'll be able to handle it, because I know how I act under stress. And I've gotten through so much other stuff. There's no reason why I won't get through this.
Love it. Oh man, love it. And so outside of the India trip, was there a specific adventure for you? Maybe India is the favorite adventure, but is there another trip? I mean, you've done some incredible sailing trips from just what I've seen through photography. Your photography is really, really sweet, by the way.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
man,
you.
it's really cool. But yeah, dude, you're so cool. Is there an adventure that you've done that's like stands out to be just like one of your favorites?
Well, I sailed aboard. This was back in 2005, when I was a deckhand on the Pride of Baltimore 2, which is a 160-foot two-masted schooner out of Baltimore, Maryland.
Okay.
And we had sailed it across the Atlantic and spent like 3.5 months getting our asses kicked by the North and Baltic seas. We sailed all over Scandinavia, right? All these different countries, UK, Ireland, Germany, Kiel, like Amsterdam, like everywhere, all over. And then we were finally ready to go into the Med and have just a little bit of a break. And about 80 miles off the coast of France, a piece of the rigging up forward in the boat failed, and it caused both masts to crack at deck level and
Oh my
fall
God.
down onto the boat. Um, and we're talking these are like 75-foot masts with 2.5 foot single trees. So the forces were enormous. It didn't sink the boat, but it completely destroyed the rigging, and we ended up being able to. No one got hurt miraculously. We like salvaged what we could, ended up pulling what we could onto the boat. Whatever we couldn't pull onto the boat, we strapped to it, motored ourselves into France. It took maybe like 24 hours to get back into France, and then lived in France I lived there for maybe 3.5 months, something like that, as we rebuilt the rig from scratch. And it was in this little town called Saint Nazaire. It was super fortunate actually, because that's where they built the Queen Mary too. So they had like locks and stuff where we could tie the boat up and actually have the space to work on it. Um, but I would say that was one of my favorite things, because we had just survived this crazy accident that was one of the worst tall ship accidents to happen, and here we were in France, kind of marooned there for the most part. Uh, and it made you learn French. So you get to learn French, and you get to kind of integrate yourself into a local culture that not a lot of people get to see, this little faded seaport town. Um, it was just awesome, man. Like I had a great time. And I would say that was probably one of my favorite experiences.
And it's interesting too that the favorite experience comes after like a quote unquote, you know, catastrophe or something bad happens, right? Like I see a lot of guys, um, they we're so hard on ourselves. We're so brutally hard on ourselves. And then like we have this vision, we've got clarity and we know what we're working towards. And all of a sudden we hit a roadblock, something bad happens, something happens in our relationship, something happens in the business, we're feeling super stressed out and we just sink, dude. Like we hit a roadblock and we sink and we think, oh my gosh, we'll see what's happening here. But the reality is that with every down, there's an up, right? And so for you, you guys had some major damage to the boat. I mean, that's serious damage. And the bright side of that is now you get to there's something good that came out of it, and you're actually saying it's one of your favorite adventures, but we don't see that in the moment, right? We just focus on, oh my god, everything's falling apart.
Yeah, some perspective really helps to step back and just focus on the what good can come out of this. And yeah, it was definitely, it was a scary time. Um, and don't get me wrong too, it's not like when all of this stuff was going down and we're motoring into France, and you know all of us had no idea what was going to happen. I mean, we didn't know if we were going to keep our jobs because we were all working on this boat, and like what they were going to do. Are they going to fly us home? Like, um, yeah, no one knew what was happening. It's not like at that moment I'm like, oh man, this is great. We're going to go
Totally.
learn French and whatever. It was only kind of in the moment. You make the best of the situation, and then in retrospect you can truly reflect on how great and how fortunate and how lucky you were to have that, and connect the dots that everything you learned in that situation has now helped you to get here, so you should be grateful for that.
Yeah.
uh yeah,
And so
yeah.
when you're going through those times on your adventures, and what's happening internally for you where the boat breaks, the motorcycle breaks down, right? These things are happening. Your business, maybe you're kind of hitting a crappy month or two in your business, right? What's happening with your internal self? I mean, how are you getting yourself through these periods of time when, let's just say, call it what it is, shit's hitting the fan?
Yeah. Well, sometimes, especially with the motorcycle, you just want to push it down a mountain, you know, like you just had enough. Uh, but you, what gets me through it,
How do you not just like let yourself manifest in downward spiral and go into this self-loathing, kind of just fear-based, right? And just stress and worry and everything's, my life is falling apart. How do you allow yourself to just kind of get through that struggle period? And I'm not saying, just to make this point clear, the personal development wants people to put a positive spin on everything, right? Like, yeah, it's gotta be positive, gotta be positive. And it's like, sometimes it's like, nah, man, sometimes it just is what it is. But how do you make sure that you at least manage that, get through that, rather than just kind of spiraling?
well, something that you learn when you're working on these old motorcycles is there's this adage that it's like whatever's going wrong, um, look at it, check the simplest thing that it could be, and if it's not it, then check it again, right? Like, and it's true, it really is true. Usually it's the simplest thing, the most straightforward simplest thing that goes wrong, and you can fix it, right? So it's about a simplification process when you're in times of stress. That's a really good way to, I think, approach any of life's problems, is that if you look at it in its entirety, like for instance, man, the bike would break down and you immediately go into, oh man, the electronics and something's wrong, and then the ignition board's messed up, that could be it, and then it's not getting like the ignition coils are not firing correctly, and right, you tend to blow that shit up in your mind.
Mhm.
But at the end of the day, you have to have enough discipline to just look at the simplest thing that it could possibly be, to push all that other stuff aside, simplify it, check that out first, because 9 times out of 10, that's the problem. And none of that other crap that you were stewing around in your brain was real. Um, so that would be my advice. Like, if it feels like it's just getting too overwhelming, simplify it to its essence, to one thing that you can solve. Um, that might not solve the entire problem, but it will start to give you a little bit of momentum to move forward and get yourself out of it. Feel like you have a little semblance of control. I think that's really what it comes down to as far as fear goes, is that it can be really overwhelming when you feel like you're completely out of control. Nothing that you do will make a difference, and you need to prove to yourself that that's not the case
Yeah.
at all, that
Yeah.
you can actually do little things to improve the situation. So yeah, that's what gets me, is the simplification process.
Brilliant. So powerful. And the best things in life are simple. Always. It's a
Yeah.
theme that keeps popping up in my life for the last couple of months, man. I'll tell you straight up, like, you know, every, things that are simple work. I think Nassim Taleb, I'm not sure if you read any Nassim Taleb, but, you know, I think you'd find some synchronicity there. He's into physics, math, right? Logic stuff. And, he just says complicated systems fail. They invariably fail. When things are complicated, there's too many moving parts and there's too many. I mean, just look at our financial system, right? So it's one example, but things
Yeah.
that are, go ahead, go ahead.
Yeah. No, you're right. Like, and I feel like it gets complicated because we try to make it real robust, you know? Like, there's all these
Exactly.
corner cases that you try to build in to be able to adapt and make sure that everything's taken care of. And that's when it starts to really fail, like, because some of the things that you build, or some of the systems, the processes, end up working against one another. When you make it super robust like that, um, there's definitely a diminishing return. So
Brilliant.
I agree. Yeah, keep it dead simple, and it'll force you to prioritize what's important, right? So if you really do need to keep it simple, you obviously can't be doing a lot of stuff simultaneously if you're keeping with the simple motif. So you need to be able to figure out, like, to pick out what's important to you and build around that as simply as possible. And the simpler it is, the easier it'll work, but then the easier you'll be able to fix it when it breaks
Right.
inevitably.
Because problems will exist until the day we die.
Yeah. Yep.
This probably the last 3 minutes of this interview is the most, I would say, the most important. And you should, anyone listening should go back and re-listen to that until it makes crystal clear sense in your brain. Because I really think what you just said is some seriously, seriously powerful wisdom. Humans have a tendency to overcomplicate everything, right? And we think that complexity means like intelligence in a way, and it doesn't. Like nature always goes by the means of the most simple, right? Like the way that energy travels in nature. I think, Josh, I mean, you're into physics. You could enlighten me way more on this, but nature will allow energy to move in the simplest means possible of achieving its goal, right? So like when water flows downhill, it doesn't try to go through the rock, it goes around the rock. And so why should humans be any different as we're a part of nature? I mean, we should be always going for the means that is most simple. And in the
Yep.
process, eliminating unnecessary suffering.
Yeah. Yeah. Agreed. It's like, I think that the reason people tend to make it a little bit more complex than it should be is because I think it makes them feel like they're gaining a little bit more of an edge, right? If it's more complex, like that's the way that they need to gain an edge over, say, the competition, or to differentiate themselves or whatever, when in reality it's it's the persistence that's way harder, right?
Mhm.
Like, you do something consistently but simple, it ends up being harder for people to keep that consistency than it is to, to just have this like shotgun of complex ideas and try and execute them all really quickly,
Mhm.
right? Of course it's probably gonna fail in the long run, but it's not gonna make you feel any better. When it fails, you're just going to be starting over from scratch again, wondering and scratching your head, which of the 5 billion little complex things that I had in my solution was the one that caused it to fail. You'll never know, and so it just seems pointless and you get disheartened. I would say i would say to anybody, I challenge you, like, take the simplest thing, do it consistently for a year, right? And see what kind of amazing results you're going to get. You're going to be ahead of everybody, because people just, man, people just can't, they can't be consistent. It's like they get tired, they feel like they're missing something. FOMO is real,
Yes.
like, yeah.
And it's, well, it cycles back to what you were talking about earlier with like, yeah, I mean, I'm glad I wasn't in all these Facebook groups and whatever, because, it's, even for Scott and I, we're in the coaching niche, and it's like, dude, I get like all these invites and all these coaching groups, and I'm just like, yeah, man. And then I just completely turn off all the notifications and whatever, because there's so much noise. Like there is so much noise in the world. And to be successful in this day and age, in my opinion, it's more about what you don't pay attention to than what you pay attention to. You should be eliminating, in my opinion. I mean, for one, don't ever turn on the news, but like you should be eliminating almost all noise. And so you can focus on that one singular thing. And Greg McEwen talks about this in the book Essentialism. I freaking love that book. But
That's a great book. Yeah, I've read that too.
it's such a good book, and it's just philosophy at the end of the day, right? I mean, keeping it simple and focusing on that one thing. This is like, Josh, you're on fire now, but like the challenge to a listener today is go think about one thing that you can focus on and just do that for a year. And if you can eliminate all the distractions or all the things that pop up along the journey, like shiny object syndrome, you will seriously, seriously crush it. So yeah,
There's
man.
Yeah, dude, I totally. There's a real quick, like, just to go off of that. There's a story that I heard a couple of years ago. You talk about these like massive masterminds and stuff.
Mhm.
Like, we're talking $100,000 to be part of these masterminds per year. Big
Whoa.
big people, and I can't remember which guy was holding the mastermind, but he had this spread of folks that were in there, and every like quarter maybe they met in person, and there was this one dude in there that was pretty quiet, and like he would show up, and the mastermind itself would last the weekend, so Friday, Saturday, Sunday. He would show up, he would listen to the first day and take a page worth of notes and then just leave. No one saw him again. He didn't attend Saturday and Sunday, right? And he did this all year. And at the end of the year, they have this recap where everybody gets up there and they say, hey, how did you apply what you've learned? Like, how much did your business grow, et cetera? And everybody's trying to outdo one another. Well, so everybody comes up and they give their numbers and everybody's clapping and whatever. Well, the guy that was running the mastermind, he says, I've saved this guy for last because as much as you guys have improved, he has improved like a combined total of all of you, right? So way more, like off the charts more, exponentially more. And I would like to have him come up here and tell you guys how he did it. So he comes up and they're like, and everybody's blown away because they're like, man, you didn't even stay for 2/3 of each mastermind. How the fuck did you do this? And he said, all I did, I figured out that I can take a page of notes. That's as much as I can execute in a quarter, right? And then I had my team, I would fly my team into the hotel room where the mastermind was, and they'd be ready. I would take my notes, I would go back to the room. My team and I would figure out how we were going to apply all of this stuff. We would put things into place, and by Sunday they were running. And then we just waited until, we executed them until the next mastermind. I got new, fresh ideas, and we did the same thing.
Wow.
That's how. It was the execution. It wasn't the ideas, but the execution of the ideas that really made the difference. And it didn't, you don't need like 3 days of notes, right? Simplify. One page, that's what you do. You focus on that, you move on. So anyway, yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, dude, I'm in the learner's seat, and I'm just thinking about for myself and Scott. I'm hearing everything you're saying, and I think it's actually potentially life-changing advice for anyone that's listening to this right now. And in the spirit of an excellent interview and time, Josh, I'll ask you one final question. This has been so great, and I hope you've enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. Final question is, if you could if you could really just put a message out to people, I mean, really think about it as, the last words that you could really, maybe you're on your deathbed or something like that, right? And someone's saying, Josh, what should I do with my life, but what have you learned, man? Like, what's the most important thing that you feel like you've learned? And there's never ever one thing, but I mean, what would you kind of part with?
Man, well, it would be some iteration of that thing I mentioned earlier about the work teaching you the work. I mean, I feel like in order to really contribute and stay fulfilled, not just like temporarily get fulfillment, but actually stay fulfilled. And don't get me wrong, I'm working on this too. But I have found that to stay fulfilled, you really do need to not listen to the fear that you feel, and simply go out there and act and recognize that you are capable of figuring it out along the way. And it's honestly, I'm sure that people have heard that before in all kinds of different ways. But the truth is that most people don't do it because they feel like there's something, it can't be that simple, but it actually really is. Like, yeah. So I would say the work teaches you the work. Don't expect that you're going to know everything at the very beginning. Yeah. Just go out there, start doing it, and you'll learn what you need to learn. And you'll be amazed at how fast you'll progress and how many people will come into your life that that can help, or that you can help. Yeah. And you'll start to be taking some big steps, Yeah. So the work teaches you the work, man.
it's just a theme that I feel like all great teachers have said. Like, I mean, I just think of so many people off the top of my head that have done, you know, really great, great things, right? I mean, Tim Ferriss is someone that comes to my mind right away, and it's just, Seneca, right? Great, just philosopher. Like, these people talk about simplifying systems. Nassim Taleb. Have you been reading Nassim Taleb, Josh, at all?
No, I've never even heard of him.
I think you'd love a. We'll talk after, but essentially, good books, Anti-Fragile by him, Skin in the Game, and he talks about this like simplified systems, and just maybe it's just people that I look up to in general, but if you can keep it simple, things will take off exponentially for you. So, Josh, a killer interview. I could talk to you for hours about just some of the wisdom and adventures that you've had, man. It's been super epic just having you on. I appreciate you coming on this, dude. And I know that for sure there's going to be guys that listen to this that get tremendous benefit out of this, dude.
I'm
So
gonna have to
thank you
look
so
him up.
much, man.
Totally, man. It's my pleasure. And you can always, like, if they want to reach out, shoot me an email or find me. It's just joshkoerpel.com.
Yeah.
So simplest way to do it. And this has been great, man. This has absolutely been great. Great interview.
Cool.
And thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah.
Seriously.
And dude, but I mean, really, before we go, I mean, this last piece of software that you're working on, because there are some coaches in our space. We have even coaches that are in our transformation program. I mean, do you want to just quickly highlight this new software that you're building with Firebuilders? It's actually something that doesn't really exist in the marketplace. So would you like to highlight that at all?
Well, yeah, I mean, like, if they go to firebuilders.io, they'll be able to read a little bit about it. But everything that we have talked about on this interview about simplification, it's not just a problem for people that are trying to build businesses. I mean, it's a problem for everybody. And and so what Firebuilders does is it helps coaches help their people simplify things into a single focus and do it on a consistent basis in a very personalized way. So, so yeah, so I originally built the whole thing for my mom. That's how the thing started, and then it kept her accountable for writing because she's an author. And then the whole thing grew, and then you're able to white label it, and now coaches use it when they want to keep all of their people accountable, right? Focused off of social media, away from distractions, but do it such that the coach's material stays top of mind all of the time.
Yeah.
And for the coach, it's just like, it's great because it all runs automatically. So it's not like they have to do anything. It just, um, it's incredibly engaging. So firebuilders.io, it's awesome, man. It really is something
Yeah.
super cool.
If you're a coach and you're listening to this and you're like curious, I definitely recommend reach out to Josh, because if there's any indication from this interview, you're a top quality guy, man. So,
Thank you.
yeah,
You.
dude. So thank you so much for coming on. This has been killer, dude. And really enjoyed it.
Yeah, same here. Thank you.
Right on.